English translation. 248th. Contact. Thursday, 3rd February, 1994, 17:04 hours.
So today I come at a somewhat unusual time.
That already answers some questions for me that I wanted to give you in relation to this. I will settle the matter immediately. An unfortunate matter that I had regarded as settled, and that I thought I would not have to worry about anymore. But now be greeted and sincerely welcomed.
I am pleased to be allowed to greet you again as well. Also, I am to convey to you and all the group members greetings from Quetzal and from my daughter, Sim-Ya-Se, whereby you should also, of course, pay my greetings to all.
Everyone will surely be happy about that.
I see that you have made a large number of notes again.
Yes, I have a lot of questions again. 6 months is a long time, and since then, all sorts of things have accumulated. But first, before I ask my questions, I would gladly like to know how far you have progressed with the technology of the new transportation systems. You promised me that I could visit Sim-Ya-Se soon, when everything works correctly.
Everything has not yet advanced so far that our transportation systems would be useful for life forms, and thus for humans. Errors still appear that demand from us that we still perform tests with some materials that still frequently get lost during transport. They probably leave from the output location, respectively from the sending location, but they do not arrive at the destination.
Then they get lost somewhere in the dematerialized energetic state between the place of departure and the destination. They get lost, so to speak, between dimensions or in foreign dimensions, right?
That is right.
Why then do you not ask Asket's friendly folks for assistance, the ones who invented these transportation systems?
Their scientists are not more advanced in these respects and do not possess any higher cognition about it than that of our own scientists. The systems have become a collaborative work, so all scientists of both peoples work together.
Oh, I see. I always thought that Asket's friendly folks would already have the perfect transportation system technology.
This is unfortunately not the case.
Then I just need to have a little more patience with the trip to Sim-Ya-Se. May I now ask my questions?
Certainly.
Good, thanks. At the beginning of our contacts, Sim-Ya-Se gave me a variety of data relating to Venus and the Destroyer, as well as to various events on Earth and so on. Unfortunately, these data do not always coincide with reality, which is why Quetzal gave me the data again in a corrected form at a later time. Ugh.
That is known to me. At that time, my daughter only spent a short amount of time on the addressed events and incidents and was not sure of the data yet. From this, it arose that she did not yet know dates and events exactly, and she confused them with one another or otherwise made faulty statements, which Quetzal then corrected, however. We also will not be immune to mistakes for a very long time.
Compare 150th Contact Report. Saturday, 10th October, 1981. 0315. HRs. Pleiadian. Pleiaran. Contact Reports. Volume 4. Page 286.
I demand no apology, my friend, for I never regard you as flawless superhumans. I only mentioned this because I wanted to know what reasons I should give to curious people who have corresponding questions, if I am asked about it, as this was even the case. Although I did not know that at that time, Sim-Ya-Se only dealt with these things for a very short time, so I just said that she had probably somewhat mixed up the data and the facts, etc. by accident. One was then also content with this explanation. But now, to another question. During the 150th Contact Report, dated Saturday, the 10th of October, 1981, 03, 15 Hrs, Quetzal spoke of the fact that a small moon, about 4 kilometers in diameter, was torn away from Jupiter by the Destroyer in the year 13,384 BC, and was sent on a journey, with which several smaller asteroids followed along. It was then said that this small moon would one day return to its place of origin, even to Jupiter, in order then to crash down on it. In addition, now the following. Earthly scientists have made the discovery that at present, a small planetoid, about 4 kilometers in diameter, is approaching Jupiter on a collision course, accompanied by several asteroids following it. According to scientific calculations, this small planetoid, which is called Shoemaker-Levy 9, is to crash down on Jupiter in the middle of the year 1994, just beyond the horizon that is visible from the Earth. Is this small planetoid the small moon mentioned by Quetzal, which went on a journey from Jupiter in the year 13,384 BC, and which now celebrates its return to its place of origin? Or is this another space projectile?
This really is the small moon mentioned by Quetzal, which will arrive into the gravitational field of Jupiter again with great certainty.
Then the next question. What insights and experiences do you have as a doctor in reference to the fact that the vice of smoking among females should produce a vaginal discharge?
That also corresponds to our insights and experiences. Females who indulge in the vice of smoking are not the only ones endangered in the genital area, as this is how men are affected by it. Yet in a more cancerous form, whereby the prostate and vas deferens and testes can be affected. With females, the dangers of inflammations of the fallopian tubes and ovaries and of cancer of the fallopian tube and ovaries are promoted by smoking. Also, itchiness and eczema in the genital area frequently trace back to smoking, as well as infertility, which can particularly occur in girls and in young women, but from which men also are not excluded, who can likewise succumb to infertility by smoking.
When I observe the humans and hear the music that they listen to, I constantly determine that the humans so much resemble the music that they take in.
This has been a well-known fact to us for tens of thousands of years. People always arrange music according to their evolutionary insight and cognition, as well as according to the corresponding feelings and thoughts, ethics and consciousness, and thus according to the imprint of the personality. In addition, it is to be frighteningly noted with the human beings of the earth that they make so-called music that truly has nothing at all to do with music, and that influences the psyche and the consciousness so destructively that the worst disharmony arises. But this so-called music is the reflected likeness of those who produce or listen to it, whose psyche is agitated and destroyed, and whose evolution is frighteningly stagnated, in that these people are hostile to life and incapable of sustaining their own lives, and they stroll along the path of massive destruction. This music, which is nothing more than a screaming disharmony, emits the worst destruction, contempt for humankind, contempt for the creation, the will for destruction, and the disregard for human rights and the rights of life. This, in contrast to truly harmonious music, which develops the psyche and evolution, which is affirmed in a life of respect for human beings and respect for other life forms, in compliance with the life-promoting laws and recommendations.
Thanks. Well said. Genesis, page 184, 3 verses 11, 15, and Om, page 69 verses 138 and 139, as well as Talmud Emmanuel, page 49, chapter 12 verses 6 and 8, talk about the criminality, etc. of homosexuality, but only referring to such a type of degeneracy with respect to a gene manipulation. About this, I have written the following as spiritual teaching explanation.
Homosexuality and what causes it. Homosexuality and natural perversity.
Homosexuality is a sexual variation that is naturally against nature. Naturally against nature means that it manifests itself through a natural process but cannot serve the law of natural reproduction. It is therefore against nature, or rather, a naturally occurring sexual variation that is against nature. Homosexuality is a variation rooted in genetics, and for this reason it is considered natural. But due to the inability to reproduce, it is categorized as being against nature. Hence, homosexuality is called a naturally occurring sexual variation that is against nature. Homosexuality as a naturally occurring sexual variation that is against nature could never be classified as unlawful on account of any of the natural creational laws and recommendations. It is therefore considered naturally normal, although against nature, precisely because of the impossibility for procreation to occur. Certain genes and their characteristics determine the type of sexual variation, including homosexuality. But genes and their characteristics, in turn, are tiny particles of nature and are thus subject to nature's laws and recommendations. This then implies that nothing can be abnormal in the sense of its naturalness. If nature permits, indeed creates it, whereby, furthermore, it follows that homosexuality is a natural manifestation whose anti-naturalness is simply based on its lack of any possibility for procreation. Furthermore, as homosexuality is a natural manifestation, hence, nature-given, it cannot and must not be considered, judged or condemned as degenerate and unnatural, and similarly not as reprehensible, as loathsome, and neither as violating natural or human law. What is termed unnatural and a transgression against nature, however, is homosexuality and bisexuality of a sodomitic, degenerate nature, the sexual gratification with and on animals of any kind. This form of sexual variation namely develops exclusively from human thinking processes and fantasies through which a person is even able to influence genes and their characteristics. By doing so, an individual can generate a particular corresponding predisposition. This predisposition then amounts to an aberration, an anti-naturalness, and a transgression against the laws of nature as described in the following verses on homosexuality in Genesis, page 184, 3. Designated as homosexuality is the physical joining of two beings of the same species and gender, also called male and male or female and female. Among all male life forms, it is an aberration against nature. Among all female life forms, it is a natural arrangement. Therefore, the sexual joining between two males is an aberration against nature, because insemination and insemination come together in a wrong act of procreation. This is a form of aberration generated by male life forms with degenerate sensory perceptions and self-generated, unnatural, perverse forms of desire. This type of sexual activity can only come about among male human life forms with inherent homophile selfishness who, as life forms, are misled and degenerated through factors of false teachings, uncontrolled perverse desires, and unlawful lusts. Degenerate sensory perceptions and self-created, anti-natural desires in perverse form, as well as inherent homophile selfishness, are interpreted as engendering a pseudo-homosexuality that is generated by one's own thoughts and fantasies, and which transgresses against the natural creational laws and recommendations, and consequently constitutes an aberration. This form of homosexuality shows no relation whatsoever to the naturally occurring homosexuality that is against nature, but genetically predetermined by nature. As a rule, the degenerate homosexuality, hence the pseudo-homosexuality that is self-created through thoughts and fantasies, is paired with other self-generated sexual abnormalities and transgressions against the laws of nature, such as sodomy, masochism, sadism, and so forth. Homosexual men, by definition, cannot perform sexually procreative acts with one another. They can merely gratify themselves sexually, as is explained in the OM, page 69, verse 138. For as a man cannot bear a child, so a procreative, sexual contact cannot exist from one man to another or between one man and another. Otherwise, it would be a transgression against the direction of creation, against creation's laws and recommendations, and against the sevenfold order. Homosexual men, therefore, cannot perform sex acts with one another, but rather solely sexual gratification. The basis for this definition is that men are unable to procreate with and amongst one another. Thus, a genuine sex act can only occur when the opportunity for procreation exists, as is the case with two human beings of different genders, man and woman. All other sexual activities, where reproductive opportunities are not provided, as with acts between two men, are simply called sexual gratification. Of course, the sexual activities between two partners of different genders who are both or individually infertile are also considered sex acts. Of importance here is only that the two are of different gender. This is how the facts are explained in the spiritual teaching. When the OM on page 69, verse 139, states that the homosexual joining of two men is punishable, it means that homosexual men are guilty then. When they come together in such a way that makes them capable of giving birth in an unnatural and sacrilegious manner, for instance through genetic manipulation, etc., and then have sexual relationships for the purpose of procreating descendants by this means. Thus, a man transgresses against the direction of creation in these matters if he sacrilegiously joins another man in a procreative, sexual relationship, and thereby he shall be guilty and punished for the remainder of his life to a place for fulfilling the corrective measure. And a similar measure shall also apply when a man or a woman joins with life forms of a different kind that are called animals. Verses 6 and 8, chapter 12 of the Talmud Emmanuel, refer to the same situation as the one mentioned in the above-quoted verse 139 of the OM. And if two men bed down with each other, then they shall be punished, for those fallible are undignified of life and its laws, and behave heretically. Thus they shall be emasculated, expelled, and banished from the people. When inseminator and inseminator join together, life is desecrated and destroyed.
AIDS origin and guilt of the unnatural.
Concerning the AIDS epidemic, the Simyase blocks state the following. This disease epidemic, which is still incurable for the Earth person, is the product of a virus, which is deformed and mutated by force, which completely paralyzes and even destroys the human body's self-defense system, and this must inevitably lead to death on occasions of even the slightest illness or injury. The Earth humans themselves bear the guilt for this deadly epidemic, namely, those who act against nature, wherewith those who act sexually against nature are addressed, whose actions are inexplicably endured, tolerated, or even encouraged by many Earth humans. So this speaks of sodomitic degenerate homosexual men and sodomitic degenerate bisexual men. Both correspond to a breach of law that is contrary to nature, which must inevitably lead to serious consequences and even death. For what is natural cannot be ignored, disturbed, and avoided for many millennia, without it avenging itself one day. Normal homosexuality and normal male bisexuality are naturally against nature, but they are not reprehensible and are not transgressions against nature. Just as bisexual relations and same-sex relations among female life forms are normal and lawful, see Pleiadian, Pleiaran contact reports and the law of love, Kas Figu. Basically, the AIDS epidemic was caused by the sodomitic degenerate anti-naturalness of homosexual and bisexual men who gave themselves over to sodomy. In particular, The epidemic was caused by the combining together of different active agents that only simian life forms carry in themselves, and these could unite with humans through the disgusting sodomitic sexual activities of men. Actually, the resulting transmitted and already very old and dangerous disease could have still been curable by earthly medicine, but because the sodomites sexually squandered among homosexuals and bisexuals, the epidemic pathogen continued to change to such an extent that it became an absolutely lethal factor. And now, medicines and defensive means must first be found and be created against this. It is to be feared, however, that these medicines will first be found when the epidemic already runs rampant worldwide, which can lead to similar events, such as at the time of the plague, which was also able to demand so many victims through human guilt. The reprehensibly acting, sodomitic, degenerate, homosexual, and bisexual men who act contrary to the laws of nature bear the guilt for this epidemic. But also guilty for this epidemic are all those who tolerate and advocate sodomitic, degenerate homosexuality and bisexuality, and also sodomy in particular, even though these forms of sexuality are absolutely contrary to the laws of nature. And with the pursuit of these, in any case, it must be counted on sooner or later that deadly or at least life-threatening consequences will appear, to which many kinds of life forms will fall prey. This will also occur in this case because those who are jointly responsible and also those who are innocent will soon be attacked by the AIDS epidemic, so including the heterosexuals, the so-called normal sexual ones. The AIDS epidemic, like any other dangerous venereal disease, is transferable, namely through direct contact, especially through sexual activity, through blood kisses and open wounds, but furthermore, also through indirect contacts, such as union with bloody saliva, etc., that the pathogens of the epidemic can settle on certain materials, such as on toilet bowls, glasses and towels, etc., and survive for a long time, and thus can also be contagious to other human beings. That is not the case. The AIDS pathogens, in this respect, also behave the same as pathogens of other venereal diseases like with syphilis and gonorrhea, where the pathogens can only be transferred directly or indirectly, so not through deposition and resumption, such as on glasses, towels, and toilets, etc. In every case, however, the Earth human must exercise the greatest caution. Otherwise, the epidemic will begin to run rampant very quickly and will become global in the shortest time. Direct contact with strangers or with such persons whose health one cannot be certain of to the greatest percent should be avoided. With hand greetings, the hands should be promptly cleaned again, and greetings with a kiss and the like should be completely omitted, as well as physical contacts of all kinds, up to the unlawful bad habit of the Earth humans in maintaining frequent sexual relations with other humans, without it concerning their actual own partners, a bad habit that is as contrary to nature as sodomy, which, in the first form, likewise produces its consequences through Caribbean herpes, which is a mutated and degenerated form of the globally spread genital herpes. Also, Caribbean herpes, or the American named herpes, is a degenerative disease of incurable form, as has already been explained, but in the coming time, it will continue to degenerate and become as deadly as the AIDS epidemic if the Earth human does not immediately order a stop to his or her sexual degeneracy. The Pleiadian-Pleiaran contact reports mention other epidemics of the future. Unfortunately, these are not the only diseases and epidemics, for in the foreseeable future, still other and very much worse ones will follow. On the one hand, the new diseases and epidemics to be expected will spread out via humans and through their guilt in a direct form. On the other hand, indirect consequences will also appear, through the destruction of nature and the destruction of the atmosphere by humans, and furthermore, New agents of diseases and epidemics will also be brought in from space by the space capsules, etc.
What do you think about it? I mean, about how I have written the explanation. Is everything understandable and sufficient enough?
In my view, everything is described precisely and exactly. Therefore, no misunderstandings should have to be expected. You should also publish the same explanation in your quarterly report. In order to counteract misunderstandings that can arise during simple readings of the Genesis, Psalm, and Talmud verses, and that will probably also arise with those readers to whom the subject matter of the language of the spiritual teaching is foreign.
Unfortunately, such misunderstandings have actually occurred previously. But in the next Aquarian Age issue, my essay is already published as an article, in a somewhat modified form.
That corresponds to a necessity.
Then to the next concern. After 17 months of negotiations, the Vatican and Israel have agreed on the modality of the mutual recognition and on the normalization of their relations, whereby the agreement received its final touch on Wednesday, the 29th of December, and diplomatic relations will likely begin in April. According to the prophecies, this is a very bad omen and points to the fact that now a third world war is still threatening. In addition, the idiotic Russian warmonger and extremist Zhirinovsky fits into this picture, according to whom the threat of a third world war might indeed be brought back into the realm of possibility.
Unfortunately, that corresponds to the actual facts. On the one hand, the prophecy of the Vatican-Israel alliance has become a reality, which actually speaks as a bad omen for the beginning of the Third World War, and on the other hand, the extremist Zhirinovsky really is an unusually nasty warmonger and tyrant, through whom not only a forced Third World War is to be expected, but who is actually working towards it in this respect. The change to the better and to peace in an increasing form, which was brought about by Gorbachev, already suffers a strong abatement through this, which can be changed quite quickly into a disaster if the madman actually comes to the power he strives after. In this regard, it now depends on the Russian people, as well as on all responsible persons of the entire world, as to whether this warmonger will actually arrive at supreme power or whether he will be overthrown and be permanently removed from the sphere of influence. He is a threat to the entire world because if he actually arrives at his targeted power, then the worst is to be feared.
He is even worse than Saddam Hussein, with whom he is indeed supposed to be allied. If just one of these two is already a tremendous ill, then together they are pure evil. To eliminate them permanently would, in my view, be a pure act of self-defense.
That corresponds to the truth, but this responsibility rests with those who have the power to do so, and they are all responsible for it.
Of course, that is not understood by all the false humanists and false peaceful people, to whom it does not make sense that through a logical application of force, a lot of disasters can be avoided, and peace, tranquility, and order can be created. A fact that is also true of the former Yugoslavia, where the UN and NATO could have already created peace and tranquility as well as order a long time ago if they would have intervened in the acts of war through logical force and would have brought these to a standstill. But the stupidity and cowardice of these two organizations speaks for itself, as well as that of those countries, like Germany and others, which are opposed to an intervention and which rely on false humanistic and false humanitarian laws and the like. But the fact that through this, they deliver thousands and thousands of innocent human beings, without hesitation, to deaths from wars and revolutions disturbs them in no wise. Then, in order to cover this up and to mitigate it, they fetch those who are wounded out of the war zones, in order to nurture them and care for them. But with this, nothing is intended other than to exercise a false humane alibi, with which they try to justify themselves to the whole world.
You are right, of course.
Another question. It happens very often that smaller and larger chunks of ice fall from the sky, with some clearly coming from airplane toilets when these are mixed with feces. But others must be of another origin. Every now and then, there are also some genuine pieces of hail, where the individual pieces are often very large. Indeed, hundredweight pieces and even larger pieces fall to the earth every now and then, and the scientists and also the laymen cannot explain the origin of these pieces of ice. We already talked about this in 1975, when you explained to me on the Great Journey that these are ice meteors that penetrate individually, or as entire swarms into the earthly atmosphere and fall to the ground, without them dissolving, respectively melting, during the downfall. In addition, the question: does this explanation possess general validity, apart from the pieces of ice from airplane toilets?
Apart from the pieces of ice, whose origin is to be found in aircraft, all other pieces of ice are those that drift through free space and arrive into the gravitational field of the Earth, where they then crash down upon the planet.
That they have esoteric factors and must be regarded as such falling pieces of ice, and perhaps as even coming from another dimension and falling down upon the Earth, as esoteric people and other believers in ghosts maintain. This has no veracity, right?
Certainly not, for these assertions are esoteric fairy tales.
Thanks. Then I'm already at the next question. For several hundreds of years, powerful explosions in the sky have been repeatedly registered throughout the whole world. This happens over desert areas, as well as very often over lakes and seas, and even ordinary landscapes are not excluded from this. The year 1908, for example, is one of those years because huge explosions took place over Lake Constance, which found entrance into history as sea bellows, etc. Also, sea roarings became a common expression, as well as other designations. The explanations for this were very varied, ranging from cannon shootings to war battles, up to the assertions of delusional believers that dimension gates would explosively tear up the air, etc. in modern times, and the presence of such explosions are attributed to the breaking of the sound barrier by jets, as well as machinations of UFOs. In the past decade, such incidents have often occurred in Europe, as well as from the 1st to the 10th of November, 1977 in northern Germany, as well as in southern Lower Saxony and North Hesse, whereby from a lack of understanding of the things, it became seriously maintained that enemy aircraft had carried out tests on breaking the sound barrier. Even the UFO theory found diligent believers. Everything is nonsense, of course, because the explanation for these massive explosions is so simple that it almost seems laughable that the Earth scientists have not bumped into it for a long time. For my part, even I have figured this out, even though I am not a scientist. And that I was right. Quetzal has confirmed this to me, when I made known to him my theory, based on the experiences of huge explosions that I witnessed in various desert areas of the world and over several large lakes and seas, which, on the one hand, I designated as airquakes and, on the other hand, as dry thunderstorms, in my opinion, under special climatic conditions, lead to huge explosions in the atmosphere and even cause airquakes that shake everything, even the surface of the Earth. But such events have already existed since ages ago, whereby the delusional believers, of course, could not give any explanations for them, which is why they attributed the incidents to ghosts or esoteric factors, as well as dragons, Mayars, and B. Translation other than the following not found? And does not make sense in context. Low-relief volcanic crater caused by interaction of water and lava, and monsters, etc. The same was also done with ice cracks, when in frozen lakes and rivers, etc., cracked icebergs burst. Now, the question is, whether there are still other explanations for such events, apart from those that I figured out myself and that have been confirmed by Quetzal. Included therein are also the meteors that graze the Earth's atmosphere, explode and produce loud or soft cracking sounds, which are particularly heard quietly at night but also during the day, when the blasts of the exploding meteors are strong and loud enough.
There are no other explanations for this because those are exhaustive. Such events of nature and the elements are not restricted to the Earth because these are natural events that take place on all planets and moons throughout the whole universe. When they have a suitable atmosphere and the climate change possibilities.
At that time, Quetzal talked about atmospheric quakes, which I have just called airquakes, probably just because certain atmospheric and climatic conditions must prevail in order to be able to produce such dry thunderstorms, etc., which can often continue for several days or even 2 or 3 weeks, whereby also flashes are produced that, taken literally, actually spurt out of the blue of the sunlit sky, as I was able to observe this several times. The saying that has been well known here since ages ago, like a flash out of the blue, might probably be based on such observations of earlier times. Or what do you think?
That's right. Those words actually trace back to such observed incidents.
With such dry thunderstorms and airquakes, respectively atmospheric quakes, I have also observed several times that in lakes and rivers or in seas, the water suddenly began to boil, or just gave the impression that it was boiling. I also saw the same things in desert areas, but there, just the sand seemed to boil. Anyhow, the sand, respectively the water, spurted up high like a column, which gave the impression of boiling. In my view, this phenomenon could have appeared in each case by the fact that pressure waves from above, from the dry thunderstorm, respectively from the droves of quakes, whipped up the sand as well as the water, by what means fountains emerged, which gave the impression of boiling. So I see it.
With that, you have also recognized the facts correctly, at least by and large, because the important physical things that lead to the appearance explained by you are somewhat more complicated. But basically, you are right with your simple description.
Nice, at least something. Thanks. But since we are already dealing with thunderstorms, etc., then still another related question. Is it true that the thunderstorms and tempests, etc., constantly become more powerful the more that the Earth's atmosphere heats up?
There is indeed a direct correlation between the heating up of the Earth's atmosphere and severe weather. The more the heat rises, the more elementary the thunderstorms, snowstorms, and severe weather, etc. become. Also, the electrical discharges in the atmosphere rise to higher levels, so to 1 degree of more heat, through which the lightning activity is raised by 10 kilovolts. Through the increase of heat, which is produced by environmental pollution and leads to the greenhouse effect, the severe weather and elementary catastrophes increase.
About this, California can presently sing a song, as well as various other American states. The heating up of the climate alters the whole world and causes catastrophes everywhere.
An inevitable consequence of the Earth human's unreasonableness. The Earth human himself or herself is responsible for what happens in relation to this and with the planet.
The Earth human is megalomaniacal and does not listen to your warnings. Basically, the origin of all the evil lies in the overpopulation, but hardly anyone wants to acknowledge this. There are still too many crazy, unreasonable, and irrational ones in the world, who only think of themselves and have their own best interests in mind. Unfortunately, we have had to see this over and over again in our campaign against overpopulation. Interestingly enough, it is especially the Austrians who react extremely negatively in the matter of overpopulation, and even with death threats against us, of course, in a cowardly and anonymous manner, even from official places, as we got to know. Out of the whole world at this moment, it is actually only the Austrians who react in this negative manner. Federal agencies and private individuals of other countries, by contrast, are grateful for our efforts. And since our action in the fight against overpopulation, this problem has very often been spoken of around the world, on the radio and on television, as well as in magazines and newspapers, etc. The fact that in this respect, It is not exactly fair that we of the Figu are ignored as the actual triggers of this sudden and global interest, as originators of the whole thing. Does not actually disturb us greatly, for it is only important that the fight against overpopulation finally reaches the public, in the form of the distribution of the necessary information to the people.
However, the troublemakers and authoritarians of all countries will still concern themselves against the necessary measures for the containment of overpopulation and will exhibit similar reactions as the Austrians, and apparently, all of these must be especially stubborn, foolish, and irresponsible in this respect. But of course, this only refers to those who struggle in this manner against all reason and even threaten you.
Of course, because one cannot throw all Austrians into the same pot, because like everywhere else, there are also good, responsible, and decent, as well as far-thinking humans in Austria. But let us leave this subject, and let us go to the next question, which relates to where the original Lyrans actually came from and when they settled in the areas of Lyra and Vega.
The time of their first emigration dates back to 110 million years ago, and their place of origin was a planet named Kados in a distant galaxy, known as the Nagarin Galaxy, at an average distance from the SOL system of 6.3 billion 6,300,000 light-years.
And can one see this galaxy from the Earth using appropriate instruments?
That is not possible because between their former location and ours is a dark cloud, located at a distance of 5.2 billion 5,200,000 light-years away, which shields and absorbs the light of the galaxy.
And why did the original Lyrans leave their home world at that time?
Their home planet passed into the fire of the Sun system as this was changing itself into a supernova.
So then, they still set off early and emigrated to the planets of Lyra.
No, that's not right, for they first settled down in other areas of other star systems and other galaxies, just to migrate then to the areas of Lyra 26 million years ago, where they inhabited a planet that, in the meantime, has passed. So then, they had to relocate once more. But these facts should not be so important for the Earth humans that we would still have to talk about them in more detail or subsequently, especially since it concerns those planets of Lyra that are beyond this space-time plane.
As you wish, then in the future, I will let such questions be. But otherwise, can you tell me when, approximately, the first flowers bloomed on Earth?
I do not know that exactly, but it should have been about 450 million years ago.
Can one perhaps still find any fossils of these?
The oldest fossils of flowers discovered by us on the Earth are 308 million years old.
Do you also have knowledge about when the first diseases appeared on the Earth that affected humans or pre-humans?
I can give very precise information about that because, according to our research, there were health illnesses and diseases on Earth approximately 4.5 million years ago.
There were already Earth-created humans?
There were only early forms of humans, upright walking, hominid tree dwellers, and ground inhabitants.
But still, clearly human life forms?
Certainly, but these beings were not yet filled with reason and understanding in the manner that the actual first human was, who even disposed of cognitive reason and a recognizable consciousness. These beings arose on the Earth at different times, so no single measure of time can be specified. The one namely developed authoritative and human-forming reason more than 3.7 million years ago, while others only became reason-bearing 2.5 million years ago, and others only 1.5 million years ago.
I have a knot in the hose somewhere. In the past, one told me, nevertheless, that humans had already been created on the Earth 6 to 12 million years ago. How does it happen that you speak of lower figures?
There must be a misunderstanding because the first human life forms emerged on the Earth 6 to 12 million years ago, which then developed over time into the human life form, Homo sapiens. On the other hand, 5 to 6 million years ago, beings from other planets were also on the Earth occasionally, who also lived here for some time but later left the Earth again. Perhaps these beings are meant in your recollection, whose reason had already been given.
Perhaps I no longer remember this exactly. There was also once talk of human life forms that were created 6 to 8 million years ago, as well as those created 8 to 12 billion, 8,000 to 12,000 years ago.
I understand. You mix up the facts a bit, my friend. These human life forms that were created 8 to 12 billion, 8,000 to 12,000 years ago were not Earth humans, but rather people who stepped into appearance. Respectively were created from beyond our galaxy, but whose distant descendants came to the Earth.
Let us leave this, otherwise even more confusion will arise. I would like to address you once again on former Yugoslavia. For nearly 2,000 years, they have been smashing their heads down there and massacring each other at every opportunity. Did you know that even Tsar Nicholas II of Russia had huge troubles with the peoples and ethnic groups of the former countries of the current ex-Yugoslavia, and that Rasputin, the Russian miracle monk, had told him in 1908 that these Balkan peoples were not worth a shot of powder?
Yes, that is well known to me.
I also cannot tell you anything that you do not already know.
I am just a few years older than you, and I also knew Rasputin personally.
I know, but still, I thought that I could tell you something that would be unknown to you. I have bad luck. I have also already had bad luck before. As you know, I have always had difficulties with millions and billions, which I, the devil knows why, often confused with one another. Now, the same problem has arisen with light years and kilometers. In previous conversations with you and Simyase, with regard to the Great Journey, etc., there was often talk of nonillions and decillions with respect to distances. With this, kilometers were always meant, but I the dope, have then always said and written light years.
These data indeed did not concern light years, but rather kilometers.
Then this would also be clarified. But now, once again a question about the exodus of the original Lyrans. The Negaran galaxy was abandoned 110 million years ago. And if I remember correctly, you said that they then settled in the Lyran galaxy, just to move then, to the areas of Lyra and Vega about 26 million years ago. Anyhow, that is what you told me around the month of May, 1991.
That is right.
Good, but I still have a question now. The Lyra galaxy went the way of the ephemeral. Can one still perhaps see its light today?
No, that is impossible. It has pushed another galaxy, which is called Nosar, to the place of the former Lyra galaxy, which emits its light since then, whereas the former light of the Lyran galaxy already evaporated long ago.
So then one cannot see the galaxy anymore. Too bad.
The light from the Nosir galaxy, however, which you designate as M83, can be seen from the Earth with good devices at a distance of only 16 million light-years away.
Mathematics, as it is used by the Earth humans, does this have universal validity?
No, not in any wise, because the most diverse civilizations on other worlds have a variety of mathematical forms, which have no similarity or relationship with the terrestrial form.
How does it happen then that your measures are the same as ours, or, at least, are similar to these?
They are not.
But you always speak of the fact that certain things have certain sizes, respectively measures, which are consistent with our measures. This is also true for physical values as well as for units of all kinds, etc.
When we gave you data on masses, weights, units, and values, or mathematical forms, etc., these were, of course, always converted by us into terrestrial mathematical terms, as well as into corresponding terrestrial masses, values, and etc.
But 7 meters are still 7 meters, when I speak, for example, of your ships, and 3 times 3 is always 9.
Certainly, but that is calculated and represented according to terrestrial mathematics. With us, there is. For example, no measure that represents a meter, respectively 100 centimeters, but only one that measures roughly a meter, so namely 88.6 centimeters, according to the terrestrial term of measure. Our aircraft, which you have cited as an example, are 8 times this measure, so a diameter of 708.8 centimeters arises, in accordance with the terrestrial term of measure. This is about 7 meters, which is why we also speak of this measure. With regard to mathematics, that 3 times 3 is 9, it is to be said, of course, that the result is right and is also consistent with our mathematics, but the form of our mathematics is fundamentally different to the terrestrial one.
To explain this would probably be somewhat complicated, right?
A detailed explanation would take too long.
Then just don't. It probably is not so important. In terms of physics, however, it must be supposed that your formulas also correspond to ours.
Like with the mathematical formulas, the physics formulas also differ. But once they are converted, they yield the same values because universally, the mathematical and physical laws, etc., are uniform in their basic value and final value, and, therefore, are one and the same, just with the difference that the various races, civilizations, and humanities of the various worlds throughout the vastness of the universe call other forms of mathematics and other terms, etc., their own. Consequently, they also have other methods of calculation than what are common among the Earth humans. Nevertheless, in mathematics, the basic value and final value yield the same results.
So if the different forms are put together and brought to a common denominator, in the kind and wise that they represent standard terms of values, for example, then mathematics is uniform throughout the whole universe?
That is right, because the overall universal laws and regularities, etc., are uniform. A difference only arises in the various forms of terms of the individual values as a result of the comprehension and judgment of the various human life forms of the various worlds.
All is clear, thanks. So the conclusion is that although mathematics does have a uniform universal validity and forms a fixed unit with the same terms of values, the human-made forms of mathematics are still fundamentally different from one another throughout the whole universe.
Right.
At earlier times, I often spoke with Simyase about the Earth humans and about humans of foreign worlds. Simyase also used certain terms for the humans of the Earth and for those of extraterrestrial origin, like also you and Quetzal and all others of your federation. Thus, there was always talk of humanoids and of extra-humanoids, non-humanoids and inhumanoids, etc. In this respect, unfortunately, there are always misunderstandings, which should one day be removed from the world. Let me, therefore, explain these things in the manner I have understood them. Correct me, please, if I make a mistake. Humanoids are Earth humans. Only, these are so called because they are just Earth-born, respectively Earth-created, in accordance with the Latin word humanus, which means something like terrestrial. The Latin term was already used by the ancient Lyrans, and to be sure, in the same way as on the Earth since time immemorial. So the term comes from the ancient Lyrans, who had also named their homeworld, in the original sense, Earth, and in consequence of this, they had also designated themselves, using a word adaptation, as Earth humans, as humanoids, after which then, in the course of time, the word humanoid was exchanged for the term human and, thus, for all human life forms throughout the whole universe, but with the difference that the differently disposed, exotic human forms, who did not exactly resemble the Lyran humans, respectively the terrestrial humans, in their inner and outer anatomies, were called extra-humanoids, respectively foreign humans. Consequently, the term humanoid was only used for the kinds of humans of a more terrestrial, respectively Lyran, nature. Nevertheless, the extra-humanoids, respectively the so-called extraterrestrials, belong to the genus Omidam, and thus are humans. It is just that they are of an exotic nature. Both terms, humanoid and extra-humanoid, trace back to the value of Omidam, which means something like first human, or just simply human. So humanoids are, always and in each case, humans, no matter what exotic appearance and what anatomy they have, and no matter whether they are designated in other forms than as extra-humanoids. I often mistakenly referred to these extra-humanoids, while speaking or writing, as non-humanoids, which does not correspond to the truth, of course, because non-humanoids, respectively inhumanoids, are, in reality, non-human life forms that are animalistic, respectively of a fauna-like or floral-like nature, and, therefore, have nothing to do with human life. The term non-humanoid, respectively inhumanoid, clearly means that such a life form is non-human. In contrast, there are, for example, the peoples of Asina, extra-humanoids who deviate in their appearance and in their anatomy very exotically from the actual humanoids and look accordingly different as amphibian beings, respectively amphibian humans, and are arranged into other living conditions than those of humans, the kind to whom we and you belong. But these foreigners are called extra-humanoids, not because of their appearance, but simply because they are of an anatomically different nature than we, who simply designate ourselves as humanoids. There are, for example, many extra-humanoids that are outwardly identical or very similar to humanoids, but they have extremely notable differences in their internal anatomies. This also testifies to the fact that they are not of terrestrial creation, but are simply beings of alien worlds, which is why they are, indeed, extra-humanoids. However, their anatomy also contributes to this designation because they are alien to those who are simply called humanoids, respectively, humans. However, this should not mislead one to regard and judge the extra-humanoids, the foreign humans, as non-humanoids, respectively non-humans. They are still humanoids and, thus, omidam humans, so extra-humanoids are, in every case, always human beings. It is just that they have no direct birth relationship with actual humanoids, the race of humans embodied by the Earth humans and your people. And to address the non-humanoid life forms once again, these are life forms that are not humanoid and, thus, are in no manner of a human nature and that also have no relationship or other connections with the human species, respectively with the Omidam and humanoids as well as extra-humanoids. And to come to speak once again of the extra-humanoids, it must be said that these are neither better nor worse humans than the humanoids of the Earth. The Earth humans, even though they often have very different and rather exotic natures, and indeed in every respect. Extra-humanoids as well as extraterrestrial humanoids are not supernatural, and are not divine, and, thus, are not monsters and not terrors. Rather, they are just as human as the Earth humans, the Earth humanoids, of whom, at least for the last 10,000 years, not exactly much that is praiseworthy can be said. When one considers that during this time on our planet, only 250 years of actual peace has prevailed. So in terms of this, as well as in reference to their manner and humaneness and compliance with the natural creational laws and recommendations, as you know, not very many positive things can be said. Concerning the reproduction of the extra-humanoids and other humanoids in the entire expanse of the universe, it must be said that in this respect, it does not occur any differently with all of them than it does with the Earth humanoids, so with the Earth humans. Therefore, sexual acts are necessary in order to witness descendants. What is different from the Earth humans is just the manner of the physical act of reproduction, in accordance with the exoticism of the respective life form, and, accordingly, its exotic reproductive organs and reproductive practices, which are often connected with rituals that are strange to the Earth humans. Also, humanoids and extra-humanoids can mate with one another in order to witness descendants, if this is possible due to the dissimilarity between the exotic reproductive organs, and if the DNA factors, etc., are compatible and allow for procreation. It is, of course, utter nonsense that procreation and births of descendants can occur in a purely spiritual form, for a material body is always tied to a physical reproduction and birth. This is a fact that punishes all those dreamers, know-it-alls, believers in angels, and other delusional believers in lies, who maintain the contrary.
Your explanation corresponds to the facts.
I just wanted to know this to be confirmed one time. Thanks. My next question. Can astronauts simply leave the material belt, the material universe, and penetrate into other creation belts, respectively, universe belts? The universe is, indeed, composed of 7 different belts, but out of these, we can only see from the Earth just a small part of the material belt and can explore a bit, while the vast expanses of the inner and outer belts cannot be seen and cannot be investigated. Even the best astronomical scientists, astrophysicists, etc., are not capable of reaching beyond the material belt with their best research equipment and apparatuses. So far, they are not even able to penetrate just the material belt, the visible universe.
No, it is not so simple to master, to leave the material universe, the material belt. Very great physical skills and experiences as well as quite special technologies are required for this, which are still completely unknown even to many advanced humanities, respectively civilizations of many space-knowledgeable peoples of many worlds, as this is also the case with regard to a change of dimensions, as well as regarding time traveling.
A question regarding terrestrial astrology. As Quetzal once told me, terrestrial astrology can only be extremely flawed, namely because the signs of the zodiac are constantly shifting as a result of the pole oscillation and rotation, whatever this may be called.
That is not an area of my interest, so I cannot give any information about that. But if Quetzal gave you this explanation, then it may very well correspond to the truth, so it is not of value to talk about it in more detail. All I know is that for a precise astrology, very many factors and much knowledge are important, and these demand far too much from the overall knowledge of the Earth humans of the modern era. Consequently, it might be virtually impossible for the Earth humans to conduct a precise astrology.
I know, it's all rather difficult when I just consider the North Star. The Earth's axis does not point exactly to the North Star. Rather, it makes a wobbling motion like a spinning top. Thus, the Earth's pole rotates almost in a circle, and therefore moves the North Star circularly. 5,000 years ago, this was still the star Tuban, and in about another 12,000 years, it will be Vega. A full circular rotation of the Earth's axis, a polar oscillation, takes 25,160 years, so 12 ages of 2,155 years. But to something else. In contrast to the idiotic Pope and other opponents of abortion, the creational natural laws and recommendations allow abortions of descendants if certain criteria are followed. On the Earth, unfortunately, it is such that the men usually decide about the abortion laws, etc., and ignore the opinions and wishes of the women. For my part, I think that the men should have nothing to say about this subject, and should let the women determine what their own will is. The women are not able to assert themselves against the autocratic male world, but this is also partly their own fault, for women often show their weaknesses and their failures in that they just get up and leave a location or a place, a quarrel, a conversation, or a discussion, if they no longer know more or cannot enforce their own wills immediately. This might also be a reason for the fact that there are so few women who possess leadership skills on the Earth. What do you think of this?
On Earth, the humans, women and men, are not yet so far advanced in their development that they would be able to display real leadership skills, which is proven in all of the earthly politics. During the last 10,000 years, there have only been very few exceptions to this, but at the present time, almost no real and responsible leadership can be found. The Earth humans simply will not grow up, so an enormous number of them remain as virtually inexperienced children throughout their short lifespans, who stagnate at the adolescent age, even if they die at the age of 70, 80, or 100 years.
About that, it can hardly be argued. Over and over again, one approaches me with questions about the Bible, respectively its contents. One such question, for example, concerns what it was all about, that the prophet Elijah slaughtered 450 prophets of the idol Baal on Mount Carmel through a judgment of God. As in 1 Kings chapter 18 verse 40 of the Bible, it is described with the words, "But Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, that none of them escape. And they seized them. And Elijah led them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there." My explanation of this is usually disputed, namely that the Bible lies and twists the facts that happened at that time. As I know the facts, all of the prophetic books and other contents of the Bible were falsified beyond recognition, whereby the prophets themselves as well as their deeds and their activities were represented completely incorrectly, which gave the impression, which has remained preserved in Christianity up to the present day, that these prophets would have killed and murdered, but this corresponds to no iota of truth. Also, Elijah never slaughtered the 450 prophets of Baal. Rather, this massacre was carried out by fanatical Jewish priests and their followers, like also the slaughter of another 400 prophets of Asherah, but no word of their murder is to be found in the Bible. Out of the total 850 slaughtered priests, who were actually priests and not prophets of their cults, only 450 priests of Baal are mentioned in the Bible.
That is right, because the additional 400 who were murdered are concealed, as the truth was also twisted in the sense of who the actual murderers of the priests were. This distortion, however, was devised with full calculation and was held in writing, in order to prove the power of God, as well as the divine calling of the prophet Elijah, who was regarded through his works as one of their people and faith. But in fact, he was only one of their people, but not of their faith. But this was never understood by the Jewish people. Elijah brought the true teaching of the creation and its laws and recommendations, but this was thoroughly misunderstood by the Jewish people as a whole, as happened with all the other prophets and their teachings, right up to the prophet Emmanuel, who was then exploited as the Son of God by Christianity, which arose from false teachings and misunderstandings. But these facts and circumstances are much more familiar to you than me, my friend, so I do not understand why you ask me about that.
The point is simply that I wanted to have your confirmation of my explanations, because one simply disputed these several times.
Then I would like to explain that your explanation is absolutely correct and contains no errors, though you know about that better than I do.
Thanks, that suffices. Then another question. Do you know something about amalgam?
Certainly. It is a mercury filling which finds use in the terrestrial dental technology as a dental filling. By the way, this is a very dangerous product that should not be used in this way because it may cause severe injury to health, such as blurred vision, headaches, memory impairment, hearing impairment, cancer, instability of the psyche, from which also severe mood swings arise, and so on. Just the vapors arising during the introduction of the filling are dangerous, as well as the subsequent discharge of mercury from the fillings. Especially vulnerable are pregnant women, who receive amalgam treatment during their pregnancy because the mercury and its vapors, etc., are transferred to the fruit of the womb and burden this, whereby various diseases as well as injury to the body, the organs, or the consciousness can also appear. The effects of the mercury discharges in the human organism and body can vary according to the constitution of the person, both in the strength of the effect as well as in the time of the initial appearance of the effects, which often only become noticeable in a malignant form when the person grows older, without a doctor then being able to fathom the origin of the suffering. So often, many human beings do not notice for a long time that they have been poisoned by mercury discharges into the organism, just to become suddenly sick then, with a multitude of ailments, for which the doctor can find no explanation.
You have given me the answer to an unasked question, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. For that was a subject, for which I was asked for my opinion some time ago. Unfortunately, I must confess that I gave a wrong answer in this regard. I said that amalgam would probably only take effect according to the physical constitution, but I could not exactly say whether that is actually so. But according to your explanation, amalgam is harmful in every case, very often even with a long-term effect, respectively with a long-term outbreak of an effect.
That is right.
Thanks for your instruction.
You can indeed correct the mistake.
Of course, I will also do that. Now, I once again have something concerning the Bible and specifically with regard to the so-called Noah's Ark, which was actually built at one time, however, at a completely different time than what is claimed in the Bible. The biblical flood did not happen at the time claimed by the Bible, but in the year 4613 BC and was brought about by the destroyer. Quetzal made the following statement: 4613 BC, destroyer falls into the Earth's orbit, which disturbs the Earth in its rotation and in its revolution around the Sun, triggering immense earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and elementary storms, and from the whole event, the biblical flood arises. The rotation of the Earth is changed, and a polar shift takes place. The biblical flood, therefore, conforms with reality, even though it has been placed in another time by chroniclers, as this also applies to the fabrication and the events surrounding Noah's Ark. This was actually built around 9,400 years earlier, and hence around 100,000 years ago, calculated back from today. Is that true?
That is right, but from what source does your knowledge stem?
From Quetzal, of course. At one time, I was together with him on Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, respectively on the Russian-Turkish-Iranian border, and indeed, because I was interested in the history of the Ark. There he explained to me these very things. The Ark landed around 100,000 years ago, and not on the peak of the 5,165-meter-high Ararat, but around 30 kilometers away, and not at the height of a summit. The size of the Ark also corresponds to the one given in the Bible. With this, the many animals and only a few human beings had really survived an earlier flood that, like the biblical flood, was brought about by a pole shift. Shows.
That is not correct, for it was a colossal tidal wave that was caused by a large comet that nearly collided with the Earth and caused enormous catastrophes, including the gigantic tidal wave through which the Ark was lifted high onto Mount Ararat.
Pardon me, then I probably mixed up the two events.
That must be so.
Thanks for your correction. Now, Noah did not live at the time of the events with the Ark, and neither did his family. Nevertheless, the event happened amazingly close to what the Bible reports. It's just that the builder was a man named Noah, man of peace, and he maintained contact with an extraterrestrial named Zebulon, he who brings the hosts of the universe, who explained the approaching danger of the comet to him and advised him to build the Ark, which he then did in collaboration with his family, and hence survived the immense flood, along with his family and with many domestic and land animals. These factual events have been handed down since approximately 98,000 years ago by word of mouth again and again, whereby the name Noah was gradually altered and fell into oblivion, and finally ended in the name of Noah, while the extraterrestrial, who was in contact with Noah, was renamed and became elevated to a god. After the biblical flood, the actual Bible arc Noah history was then created, whereby the true origin of the events ultimately became lost.
That is what is also recorded in our chronicle with regard to the important events on the earth. Your explanation is therefore correct.
It is simply astonishing, so I think that in spite of the later biblical falsification, the history of the Ark has been so well preserved for more than about 100,000 years, when one just considers that during that time, very few people lived on the whole Earth. Do you perhaps know the number of people who lived at the time of the comet catastrophe and the number of people who died?
There exists with us no precise data about this, but only estimates. These say that prior to the massive tidal wave, approximately 870,000 people lived on that part of the Earth, but as a result of the catastrophe, about 650,000 lost their lives. Out of the surviving 220,000, about 140 people lived on the Ark, who, after the time of the flood, then settled the land again in the Middle East, where many foreigners then also immigrated. This total of about 220,000 people had it very hard because for many thousands of years, they were decimated again and again by epidemics and all sorts of other disasters. Therefore, they could only multiply very slowly at first, and only reached a total population of 11 million people about 10,000 years ago, distributed across the whole Earth, of course.
And in only 9,500 years, there were then born another roughly 500 million humans. And after that, since the Middle Ages, during just another 500 years, the Earth person actually managed to increase his population by the year 1994 to an incredible 5.8,580,000,000 humans, from which all the crazy consequences of global destruction result. The climate, atmosphere, ozone layer, and other protective layers, which the terrestrial scientists do not know of yet and, thus, cannot talk about fauna and flora, as well as human life and the planet itself, drive towards destruction by the human's guilt, a fact that has already become evident. Nevertheless, there are still the irresponsible idiots who thoughtlessly assert that, on the one hand, the Earth still will not be overpopulated for a long time and could still carry and nourish several billion more humans, and that, on the other hand, all the elementary disasters appearing worldwide, the earthquakes, air and environmental pollution, tempests, floods, heat spells as well as cold spells, typhoons, hurricanes, gales and tornadoes, snowstorms and blizzards, volcanic eruptions, landslides and mudslides, and so on, would have nothing to do with overpopulation. A brainless short-sightedness, rejection of responsibility, and a misjudgment of reality, as well as a playing down of the truth by criminals of all backgrounds, starting from the so-called average citizens up to the scientists and powerful economic figures in governments, who make their profits from it. What's more is that besides the obvious dangers for all life and the entire existence of the planet, still other dangers threaten, which the scientists do not have any idea of yet, or else they conceal such threats if these are known to them.
Unfortunately, that corresponds to the facts.
Facts that, unfortunately, cannot be changed so quickly due to the disputatiousness, greed for profit, irresponsibility, indifference, superior attitude, and disregard for the truth by a large number of Earth humans. The irresponsibility and greed for profit, etc., are much more pronounced in the Earth humans than the sense of responsibility, reason, and intellect. Nevertheless, one could talk endlessly and curse about this, so it would probably be better if we would turn to other things once again. Another question. Here on Earth, for the precise defining of human beings and their family trees, etc., we use so-called surnames and first names, as even you use these. But now, how does it stand with you regarding the closer naming, respectively more exact naming, of a family tree, a family or kinship, as well as a lineage, etc.
There is a great resemblance to the terrestrial form.
Then you also have lineages, respectively family names.
Certainly, it is just that these are formed differently, of course, and are related to other origins than what is the case with you.
Of course, that should be clear. But how do you handle it, I mean with the surname, once a marriage is established? And how do you actually join a marriage together? As an official procedure, like with us? Or just as a voluntary joining together unto a marriage between two people? If I remember correctly, Quetzal once told me that the latter is the case.
I want to answer the last question for you first. While the first one seems illogical to me and is not understood by me, the process of marriage with us is that such a union is first preceded by a trial period of at least 2 years, during which the two future partners live far away and apart to test their feelings, etc., for each other. After that, they undergo various voluntary tests and clarifications regarding the capacity to marry in all areas, including, of course, the factor of descendants and the upbringing capacity of the parents and so on. These tests, which include virtually all areas of a marriage, are carried out in an authoritative manner, respectively by a spirit leader, and are voluntarily undertaken by those to be tested. If a true capacity to marry is found, then the two lovers are united to each other in a marriage of a free form. This means that they get together in a free marriage, without there being an official regulation or joining together, and without such being required. Such a form of marriage would not be good, and would also be connected with many problems. For an official joining together equals an inevitable compulsion, which arises from certain official regulations, etc. This corresponds to an experience that already became owned by our ancestors, which is why the solution for many evils that arose from official marriages was sought in the free marriage, as we practice this today and work with it very well. The various ancient evils that, in official marriages, often led to very vicious assaults, and even killings have been resolved since then and no longer appear, which has nothing to do with the fact that differences of opinion could not arise, but these no longer degenerate as they did in much earlier times when rather official rules for marriages still applied. Free marriage, and thus, the free marriage alliance offers many advantages. So, among other things, that the two partners do not feel chained together by an official compulsion, as this is indeed the case with an official marriage because an official and legal obligation exists. Through this, the spouses do not feel free, as this is actually not the case with a free marriage. However, the lack of freedom creates many and very often unsolvable problems because the freedom of one's own decision and action is missing, due to the fact that the partners are bound together by an official regulation in a manner that they cannot necessarily separate from each other out of their own volition if their marriage is not in harmony and so on. Rather, this is only possible through the compliance with official regulations and a corresponding action. In a free marriage, the partners do their own free will together, according to their very own decision to decide independently on anything and everything in their marriage in an absolutely free form. This also ensures that the feeling of togetherness is extremely strong, as well as the sense of responsibility toward all aspects of the marriage bond and toward the partner. This should actually suffice as an explanation.
To be more detailed probably is not necessary. However, the question remains open. What happens then if the wise ones, etc., find that a marriage between two partners is not advisable?
The giving of advice, for those whom the tests concern in the end, is carried out jointly with the test participants, who adapt themselves into the given advice with a counselor before marriage and separate themselves in order to continue to stand together in a simple, platonic friendship with each other.
And there are no problems with that?
Among the early days of the introduction of the system of free marriage, that was the case, but for more than 28,000 years, nothing like that has become known.
Great. This system would also be advantageous for the Earthlings, even if there would first be an enormous ruckus. When I consider the authorities, religions, and those who are emancipated, these would cause a lot of disaster. But also others would rise up in arms, just those who do not think things through and who simply walk hand in hand in the old rut and with old ideas. Also with regard to polygamy, which is also anchored in your marriage system, that a man even has several wives. This encounters immense opposition on Earth, especially with the women, who in this respect, Billy, are not very far thinking or are trapped in their false religious policies and false ethics and live moralistically incorrectly, or who are simply unknowing and also wrongly taught, forms that can also arise with men, of course, and which actually do this. But now, you have not answered my first question yet, since you did not understand it. I asked about family names, respectively surnames. Once a marriage bond is closed, what family name, respectively surname, becomes effective in the family, respectively with the wife and with the descendants? Do the wife and the children receive the surname of the husband, or does the wife keep her premarital surname? And what happens with the children?
This is regulated with us by a law, and indeed, in the way that wives and descendants resulting from the marriage bond, in each case, always bear the surname of the husband, respectively, the father. This is regulated in such a manner because solely through this, confusion in the degree of kinship as well as in the family tree can be avoided. Even at very early times, our ancestors made the discovery that there were incredible confusion when female spouses retained their premarital surnames or even transferred them to their descendants. From this, there arose much disaster and confusion, from which incest emerged on a massive scale, as this happened in Sodom and Gomorrah with the ancient Jews, when the two cities degenerated into pure herds of incest.
Did your ancestors have something to do with Sodom and Gomorrah?
Not the ancestors of our own lineage, but those of diverging lineages, for these interfered in the affairs of the ancient Jews, who degenerated, for example, in Sodom and Gomorrah, into wide-scale incest, for which they were punished with a total annihilation by nuclear fire, etc., by the one who was angry about these unbelievable activities.
Aha, Yase and Quetzal already talked about that. But now, something completely different again. And indeed, again to the women. Women are often suppressed on Earth, as you know, by the male world and regarded as half-humans, etc. They are restrained by the men in almost every wise in their development, as well as in their freedom and self-realization. Without that, these women would be emancipated and would crossly stir up the men through this. Thus, men are usually vigilant about trying to be dominant over women, while exceptions are also to be seen, of course, but only in small numbers. But now, on the other hand, it is also the case that women gain the same pretense and mannerisms as men when they develop as emancipated or come into leadership positions. This is a phenomenon that does not just come to light now in the modern age, but has existed in ancient times. And especially in this connection, the time of the Latins is to be mentioned, thus the time of the Romans. Can you tell me why this is? I mean, why it is that women and men are always trying to dominate each other. It is absolutely clear to me that leaders must emit a dominant power, just to be able to lead and manage others, whereby success and progress are guaranteed. But it is not necessary that the dominant leader is also domineering. Also, a leader can behave very normally and as an equal and only claim for himself or herself those rights that also apply and that are assigned to those being led. In my opinion, it can only be that the dominant's power, in the sense of the domination of man and woman, is not just dominance in the usual sense, but rather a lust for power and domination that presses down and even suppresses all those who are weaker.
With that, you have already given the correct answer.
Do you have any further explanation for it?
Lust for power and domination appear everywhere where no balance is given with regard to the equality of all human life forms. Due to the lacking equality, there is a lack of order and honest law, as well as propriety, reverence, and respect toward the entire existence of the neighborly human life as well as life in general. These deficiencies in humans, who have a lack of feeling of equality and sense of equality, and who have a tendentious dominance power, lead to arrogance, lust for power, and domination, and often to megalomania and despotism, etc. However, if an expression of equality and equal valuation is given for all humans and other life forms in a dominance-gifted person, then he or she positions themselves in the value of humanity in solidarity with all other human beings. So they do not raise themselves above others in a might-hungry, dictatorial, and domineering manner, but rather concedes to them the same rights as themselves. These facts also arise between husband and wife, whom you have primarily addressed with your question.
Also, money and other material wealth of all types lead to the same phenomenon of the lust for power, tyranny and dictatorship, as well as despotism. But here, there is at least the tendency of a lack of sense of equality, which is created by the human being themselves and is not just given at birth. The expression of the sense of equality, which also includes equal rights as well as equality for life and legal equality, is the product of a properly committed and properly understood evolution through reason, intellect, and awareness. Ah, yes. I still wanted to ask you a few things about the comet that was the actual trigger of the arc events, and that caused the Sintflut. The term Sinnflut, German Sintflut, also falls within range of my question because, as a rule, what is meant by this is not understood by the Earth humans. In the past, the Christians remodeled the term for their own use, and especially the Christian churches contributed much to this, in that they remodeled the word part sin, respectively sint, in the word and maintained that Sintflut means nothing other than sin flood, loosely based on the assertion that God had punished the disobedient Earth humans with a colossal and global flood for their sins. But in truth, the term Sintflut has nothing to do with the concept of sin, but rather traces back to the very ancient Germanic prefix, sin, to which was added the gliding sound of t, by what means the word sint arose. However, sin, respectively sint, in ancient times, meant something that was quite perpetual, gathered, or colossal. The term flood is just as ancient and was referred to as vlut at an earlier time. Thus arose the ancient term Sintflut, which then found the value of Sintflut in the newer German language. Anyhow, so says the dictionary that Sintflut means colossal flood, great flood, or gathered flood, etc. Is that right?
Certainly.
Good. Then the question about the comet. Do you have any records that give information about how large the comet was that triggered the Ark Great Flood about 100,000 years ago? What orbital period this comet has, and when it will come again? It would also interest me as to how many such comets or other space projectiles are whizzing around in our solar system, and how many of these can endanger the Earth.
Although I am unaware of that, I can retrieve the desired information through this device. It will just take a moment. Please wait. Yes, here. The comet that you asked about had a diameter of around 260 kilometers and had an orbital period of 143.7 years. The time of the arc events was its last passage through the solar system because after it had passed by the Earth, it continued toward the Sun, just to plunge into it. Therefore, it will not return. 8864 asteroids drift in the area of the orbits of the inner planets, according to the data specified here.
These drift in the orbits of the inner planets?
No. I expressed myself unclearly. The asteroids have orbits that cross the paths of the inner and outer planets, but some have their own paths that reach far beyond the area of the last planet of the system. The largest of these asteroids has a diameter of 21.42 kilometers, while others that drift outside of the orbit of the last planet of the Solar System are up to 38.67 kilometers in diameter. But these have no risk or only little risk for the inner solar system because they only drift into the outer or inner planets' orbital areas as a result of certain circumstances of cosmic impacts. But this looks different for the 8,864 other asteroids that have orbits in the inner Sol area because planets and moons are often threatened by them. So even also the Earth. And indeed, in the form that collisions can occur that are capable of causing tremendous catastrophes, whereby even very large parts of the life forms on Earth could be destroyed if it would be hit by a large asteroid. And the possibility that such an event will arrive is actually given, even though is not part of an everyday occurrence. Such has already happened several times, whereby great catastrophes rolled over the Earth, which also happened several times during the last 12,000 years.
These space projectiles, or space bombs as I call them, what materials do they consist of?
This differs. Some consist of rock, others consist of iron or copper, while others consist of other metals or ice. Also, many of these can be found that are a mixture of rock, metal, and ice.
And in the extreme Sol area that is beyond the orbit of the last planet, how many projectiles whiz around there, which you also know of?
As I can see from my device here, only an estimated number is available, which is given at about 240,240,000,000,000. But this number is an estimate, which includes even the countless smallest pieces. The larger and largest objects are indicated with a number of 71.6 million.
A respectable amount? Now, I would like to focus again on something that we already talked about once before. One of your main directives determines that you may never interfere in the spiritual development, respectively consciousness-related development, and thus also not in the cultural development of any human race, people, or humanity of any world, if these are not already capable of the right astronautics. But what happens then, if you are asked for an intervention?
Even then, the same principle applies.
With that, I understand it in the case of when the persons concerned do not yet dispose of authoritative spaceflight technology.
That is not entirely true because the directive addressed by you does not just apply when there is a lack of spaceflight technology, but also when cultural developments are still at levels that are in great need of development. Included in this is also the necessary knowledge about the actual existence of human life throughout the universe. Also ingrained in the same directive is that we may not interfere in cultural scuffles if the cultural development is not highly developed enough and is not in accordance with the standards, as these are prescribed in our guidelines.
When or where, then, are you entitled to interfere?
Only where the demands of our directive are met with respect to spaceflight-related and cultural development and when there are no scuffles of any kind.
Ah, I think I understand. Where the demands of your directive are fulfilled with respect to spaceflight technology as well as cultural development, you may provide or offer assistance upon request. In this case, you may answer cries for help, under the condition that you must not interfere in the existing cultural state and not in their development. With the fact that you may not interfere in scuffles, it is stipulated that you may not intervene in any wars or revolutions, and also not in any political or cultural confusion or maladministration, etc., or provide assistance. Is this right as such?
You always know how to explain the facts by which you are honored. This actually applies in such a manner, except in special emergencies that arise here and there.
Your daughter, Simyase, already continually threw flowers at me, my friend. But if I understand your words correctly, then you may also interfere with cosmic catastrophes, etc., not in the affairs of any humanities and planets?
That is right. There are, however, exceptions, as I said.
To what extent?
When it concerns assistance that is provided to peoples, races, and civilizations, as well as to planets that are directly connected to the alliance of our Federation.
There, it would once again interest me as to how far this Federation actually extends, because you have told me several times that you have investigated some very far-away enterprises. It would also be interesting to know whether other civilizations have the same laws and rights as those of the Pleiaren.
The duties, laws, and rights are uniform throughout the entire Federation. This is one of the basic prerequisites to join our Federation. The Federation is very broad and extends to a distance of 6.2,6,200,000 light-years, where in connection with our Federation, another member federation exists according to our model. In between the two federations, which have a sphere of influence of many millions of light-years, there are isolated systems that also belong to our federations.
You have never told me anything about that.
A conversation also never arose in this direction. You have now asked about it for the first time.
You still have not fully answered my question regarding whether...
I understand, of course. My answer only referred to our federations. Indeed, there are still other civilizations that have the same or similar directives as we have, but there are also many that know no inhibitions in this respect, but rather interfere without hesitation in other cultures and wage wars, etc. In relation to this, there are quite ruthless space-traveling peoples.
Do you have political and diplomatic relations with such?
That is an inevitable consequence of spaceflight.
This leads me to a question concerning us on the Earth. Is the EC, respectively the EU, European Union, as it is called today, a concept that is known to you?
Certainly, because the political affairs on Earth belong to our areas of observation.
Good. What do you think of this EU, its regulations and laws, etc.?
In reference to this European Union, I can only give you information that is based on the statements and findings of our political scientists, whom I, nevertheless, support wholeheartedly. The idea of such a union, which should ultimately be far-reaching and include all peoples, is very ancient and was first realized by Enoch, whereby a common and planetary economic basis arose, which led to uniform balance and prosperity. What is going on with this European Union, however, has nothing to do with Enoch's system, for instead of creating unity and stabilization as well as assimilation and revision of existing laws and regulations, there are impossible, inexpedient, liberty-restricting, and new laws that are of low intelligence and regulations arising from incompetent politicians, who establish themselves in and through Brussels as rulers of the European Union and who characterize themselves more and more as despotic and dictatorial, from which in the end a total control of the individual can result, which is already secretly striven for by certain elements. The secret idea is that the powerful figures can consolidate themselves in Brussels and become so dominant that all of Europe and, one day also, the rest of the world will fall under their dictatorial control, which is vehemently denied, of course. But in truth, secret ideas and plans relating to this already exist among certain elements, in order to create a totalitarian dictatorship under the exclusive control of the rulers in Brussels. Thus, whoever joins the European Union goes into the lion's mouth, as a terrestrial proverb says. And if the people and national governments blindly continue to trust the words and machinations of Brussels and do not draw the right conclusions from it, then the dark and terrible truth of an impending dictatorship will prove itself to be true.
Many Earth humans have also already recognized that, which is why they also often rise up in arms, but without great success.
That is known to us.
Thus, I think that even more should be done by all those concerned. But now, I would no longer like to talk about this. Se, your daughter, had reddish-colored hair for a long time. Is that usual with you? I mean that women dye their hair? Although we have talked about these things once before, we were not detailed enough. You explained to me that women among you do this, but it did not arise as to whether they only do this for purely medical reasons and whether this is not actually harmful to the hair.
Female beings among us actually color their hair every now and then because a certain amount of vanity is not to be denied to them. Nevertheless, the dyeing of the hair is not just vanity conditioned, but is always connected with a health measure. It's like this. Even though prominent diseases no longer appear among us, this does not mean that certain suffering still does not come to light. However, these are of an insignificant form, like a runny nose. There are also allergies and a few other insignificant illnesses. All these illnesses are often lengthy and require prolonged treatment, like also headaches, for example. But this does not mean now that many medicines would be necessary for their treatment. Per symptom, only one active agent is necessary against it, which is delivered with a long-term effect. These active agents are not ingested, injected, or administered through special requirements for deposit. Rather, they are introduced in healthy, absolutely harmless carrier substances that are mixed with equally neutral and non-health hazardous coloring means with which the hair is then dyed.
So then, you do know illnesses.
These are not actual illnesses according to your sense, but rather trifles that occur in the course of life due to some circumstances that the persons concerned are exposed to, like when they come in contact with some things on strange new worlds that then cause the suffering. But such sufferings are, in fact, always only trifles, which also no longer appear on our world, and thus do not matter anymore.
Then your world is, so to speak, sterile?
No, the humans are immune to all diseases that once existed on our planet. They are also largely immune to diseases of other worlds. But various insignificant sufferings as well as accidents with insignificant consequences cannot be avoided every now and then when these have their origin on planets that are foreign to Era.
Then only those people who also visit foreign worlds become sick with the insignificant sufferings?
That is right. That is also the reason why we exercise great caution with respect to health.
Now I understand somewhat better. But how, for example, can one of you suddenly suffer from a headache, which seems like a migraine?
That can happen through the inhaling of an atmosphere that is very well breathable for us, but which contains weak components of toxic gas that attack certain parts of our nervous systems, as this was the case with my daughter, Se, for example.
But still, you do have your devices and apparatuses that indicate to you such toxic gases, etc. Accordingly, you can then wear protective suits.
Certainly that is right, but on the one hand, our measuring instruments can only detect and indicate those materials that are known to us, in order then to analyze them. However, other substances that are unknown to us cannot be analyzed immediately if we must first explore their composition. Moreover, it can happen that certain gases, etc., only arise here and there or in a locality, and indeed in such a quick form that a countermeasure is hardly possible anymore. So it may just happen that every now and then such substances are inhaled, which can then produce lasting consequences, which we then just treat in the explained manner.
We could also carry out such a manner of treatment on Earth.
Great medical knowledge is also necessary because hair represents an extremely sensitive factor of energy exchange and health. On Earth, the usual means of hair dyeing are extremely health hazardous, and they even destroy the hair in the course of time. All terrestrial means of hair dyeing, on the one hand, tend to produce different types of cancer, with lymphoma being the principal form, and on the other hand, they destroy the receptiveness and conductivity for the cosmic electromagnetic energies.
Can one understand this as a percentage?
Certainly we have precise knowledge about that. Terrestrial means of hair dyeing reduce the flow of cosmic electromagnetic energies by 8.32%, when natural means of coloring are used. With chemical means of coloring, the flow of the cosmic electromagnetic energies is reduced by as much as 9.67% and often even to 0.
Uh-huh. In foreign worlds, these surely are not just gases that give you a hard time health-wise, right?
Of course not, because dust particles, pollen, viruses, bacilli, bacteria, plant juices, and various other things can infect us with diseases if we are not immune to these.
Aha, so yes, then you are not just susceptible to trifles.
As a rule, it only concerns trifles, which are then treated in the form that I explained.
And when, apart from the rule, a worse illness makes its appearance?
That would be a great exception, and such would be treated, of course, with the suitable medical means, whereby the healing process would then take no more than a few minutes, or at the most, a few hours.
And in cases of accidents with fractures, etc.?
Our medical possibilities are capable of healing a fracture in less than 6 hours if the break does not first have to be addressed. But if this is the case, then the process takes a few hours more. Concerning diseases, our immune systems are so strengthened and protected that all diseases that are known to us cannot befall us. But only those that are unknown to us and against which we have no immunity, respectively those whose originators are unknown to us and against which we cannot even protect ourselves.
And how does it stand then with the cold? Simyase once complained to me that you also have to struggle with it.
It concerns an insignificant evil that befalls us, but only on the earth. However, we are still able to become masters over this.
Nice for you. With us, it is, in spite of many medicines, still a great evil. But now, can you still give me information in relation to Earth's ozone layer, as well as to skin cancer and the development of AIDS? Have these three evils now stabilized, or do they continue to grow?
The destruction of the ozone layer is progressing just as steadily as also the increase of skin cancer through the effects of UV radiation of the sun. Also, the AIDS epidemic continues to spread and increases in its infection rate. So far, there is still no time in sight when these scourges will slow down or will even disappear.
And all because of overpopulation, which grows steadily and makes everything worse by the hour. Due to the growing and already existing overpopulation, all measures against any evils become absolutely pointless and useless from the start, for the power of the overpopulation and the evils, as well as their effects, are much greater, more immense, more powerful, and mightier than any action taken against an evil, a fact that all human beings actually should have already seen and recognized, but which is not the case, unfortunately, because so many irresponsible idiots and criminals as well as ignorant ones minimize and trivialize the truth that, on the one hand, an enormous overpopulation prevails in our world and, on the other hand, that all existing and constantly renewing evils arise from the overpopulation. And one of the evils cannot be fought against and cannot be eliminated if the overpopulation does not become drastically and rigorously reduced to a normal planetary human existence, which stands at 529 million. The survival of humankind is only guaranteed through this in the long run, because the resources that were once in abundance for such a quantity of human beings were only determined, since the beginning, for 529 million humans. And if the Earth human still wants to continue to exist and evolve in this world, then he or she can only do so in that they drastically and rigorously reduces their overpopulation through a well-coordinated and worldwide birth stop, as well as through other necessary measures, to reduce it to the normal stock of 529 million, through which, in the long run, sufficient resources will be in place in order to bring humanity to a high level of development, which will allow them to fly out into the vastness of universal space in order to search for new settlement planets. What is still sad about the whole overpopulation problem is that all those who can already pull themselves together to speak against or write against this Earth humanity that is getting out of control do so with trivializing, inexpedient, soft, and false humane words and remarks, which really minimize the roaring seriousness of the situation in such a manner that hardly anyone thinks seriously about it, or else wrongly understands and wrongly judges the life-threatening state of affairs. Everything nowadays is simply made so soft with nice words and false humanitarian expressions that the reality is no longer recognized. But then, when someone comes along, like me for example, who reveals the facts and calls them by their real name, he is insulted as filth. But exactly this is necessary if one wants to get through to the human beings. Only by one breaking down the plaster and using harsh and truthfully meaningful words of open speech. Only through this can one still be heard today, precisely because humans feel attacked by the forthright language and consequently get upset. But with this, the purpose of the exercise becomes fulfilled because the humans start to think and deal with the facts that one has hurled at their stubborn skulls with frank words.
In all concerns, I can only agree with you. But now, my friend, I have to think about going again.
Please, just one more question. I will postpone the others to next time. In Switzerland, efforts are still prevailing in different governments with regard to the drug problem. Namely that the best solution is that one should help the drug addicts in the kind and wise that places to stay, and free drugs are made available to the addicts. Responsible persons in the city of Zurich, such as Emily Lieberherr and her supporters, as well as in Bern and elsewhere, believe that the problem can be solved by a controlled, free supply of drugs. What do you think about this?
That is a fundamental error, but one that is typical for the confused and illogical thinking and feeling of the Earth humans, who must also be ranked in this respect among those whom you addressed just now. The proponents for a free supply of drugs and for the provision of places to stay for drug addicts, etc., are so caught up in their false humanitarianism that they are no longer able to grasp the reality. Only individual addicts can be taken in, but not all of them. Therefore, such activity only amounts to a drop on a hot stone.
But what about the wide, comprehensive drug rehabilitation centers that take in all the addicts? Where replacement drugs are given under medical supervision or under other trained personnel, and where drug addicts are also living?
Nothing is to be argued against it. Even when after a denial of drugs occurs and an addiction is cured, the patients are further cared for over an extended period of time by socially skilled personnel. A free drug supply for drug addicts, in simple drug addict sites or on streets and in places or in unregulated residential facilities, is to be approved in no wise, for the whole thing only calls for even more misery, even if the drug-related crime may decline somewhat. A free supply of drugs is irresponsible, even if it can promise success in a few cases.
Thanks. Then until we meet again, if you must go already. Greet everyone quite nicely, and this time do not let me wait for you so long.
Around the middle of the year, I will likely visit you again. Farewell until then, my friend, and until we meet again.